Hi, Lisa. Can you all hear us? Okay, hello, welcome. Athena, hi. Wow, thank you for joining. Caroletta, hi. Look at me waving. I'm so excited. Awesome. We'll start at 2:02. So we'll just let other people join for another minute. Ani, do you want to go to that first slide so everybody can let us know? Okay, so let us know what you're hoping to accomplish during this presentation and where you're joining us from. Indianapolis. What's the weather like there, Barb? It was 67 degrees yesterday, guys, in Atlanta. I was shocked. I don't know what happened. It's cold? Wow. Okay. Looking for tips for upcoming Workday benefits implementation. Wow, we were just talking about Workday. Okay. This will be perfect, Athena, for you. Ah, when I hear Jersey Shore, I don't know, I think of great weather, and I know it's not great all the time, but the word just,
I was afraid, Leah, that you were going to say the television show
I
because
was
that's,
I was gonna say I was gonna say Snooky.
yeah, I'm afraid that's what we usually get.
oh, um, no, I think of good weather, and I know it's
Oh,
not
yeah.
true, right? Like all
Well,
the
not
time, like most of the
always.
time.
When it is good, it's really beautiful.
Okay.
So we really value the days when it's truly glorious.
All right. Well, we should start. It's
Hmm.
2:03. Welcome everybody to another Lunch and Learn, our summer series, Lunch and
Hmm.
Learn. Thank you for joining us. I'm seeing so many people who are really supportive of what we're doing here. So thank you, thank you, thank you. 69. Okay, I see that. So what are we talking about today? How to implement a system, an HR system successfully. And Athena, I can't wait for you to, and everybody who has joined us today, to hear what we have to offer. So I'm really excited, next slide, to introduce our guest speakers today. So I'm going to introduce myself briefly and then you'll hear from our guest speaker. So I'm Leah Joyner, for those who don't know me. I'm the founder of HCM Tech Advisory, and my consultancy was based from working at a company where I was doing configurations and coding of a system where we were managing very large benefits administration clients. And while I was there, I noticed and realized that clients really need an advocate in this space that can explain to them the lingo. Do they need the system? Do they not? What is the process like? What is right? What system is right for them, even because there's so many systems out there. So, what I do today is essentially just advocate for my clients when it comes to system selection, implementations, um, optimization, because just implementing a system and getting a new system is not the answer to whatever the problem is. So that's what we do, and a little bit of HR consulting. So today I am joined by one of my favorite people, and has become a great friend of mine, Jason Lawrence, who is an HR software consultant. I met Jason interesting enough, when I was implementing Workday and he was the salesperson, and I quickly realized that he was really my confidant and somebody that I could talk to that could really, help me when issues were arising. And so we've just developed a friendship since. And I would love for Jason to, talk a little bit about yourself and tell our audience who you are and what you do.
Sure. So, Jason Lawrence, I live in Coleman, Alabama. I'm a native of Atlanta, but we bought about 9 years ago 70 acres between Birmingham and Huntsville, Alabama. But I have been in the HR world for about 20 years. I've co-founded a couple of professional services firms in Atlanta, sold them, took an early buyout on one, and then kind of moved into the software space. Then and Leah, essentially the word used as an advocate, because that's how I've always looked at it. I've bought software and implemented software as a business owner, and then the gotchas just absolutely infuriated me, where it was, I saw this in the demo, but why can't I do this now? And I've just paid all this money. Like, oh, well, that's a different product or that's an add-on. And that's the sort of stuff that just, it makes me want to come to the side and advocate for customers. But from a software background, I've got, oh, I don't know, about eight years on the Oracle side. I have 23 Oracle Cloud certification specializations from Oracle. Then I've spent the last 3.5 years on the Workday side, and I've got a handful of certifications on the Workday side. So was happy to join Leah on this call and see if you guys can get any information that's helpful for you to come in. And Gadsden, yes, very familiar. That's awesome. Looking at the chat.
Yeah.
But yeah, looking forward to jumping in.
Thank you. And then our next guest, our featured guest, Jeanne. So Jeanne Achille, I've gotten to know her over the past few years, even though she didn't know me, but I knew her just from the industry. She's a voice in the HR tech space, somebody that I truly admire. And what I love about Jeanne is she is candid, right? In the space where, you're selling things and, you may hear things that aren't always right. And Jeanne deals with technology companies. She helps launch tech products essentially and tech systems, but she's also the buyer's advocate. There goes that word again. So I don't know how she's able to balance the two, but I've heard her speak, and I know that she really believes in the right thing for the buyer. So I would love, Jeanne, for you to tell the audience a little bit about you and what you do.
Leah, thank you. Excuse me. I'm sitting here smiling, and I'm afraid that I'm not going to date myself. I think my decades in HR tech go really way back, like to when the HR mess was on the mainframe. So I'll leave that there. But I think that's also why I am so passionate about being an advocate for the buyer, because I've seen when things go really well, and I've seen when things go really, really poorly, and the pain and suffering that comes along with that. So I'm particularly sensitive to that. I have the pleasure of being one of the chairs of the HR Tech Conference, and have been affiliated with the HR Tech Conference for 20 plus years now. And also to Leah's point, we do help number of the solutions providers launch their products, message their products. I was also in charge of product management at Ceridian for a number of years. My R&D team was in Atlanta, so even though I'm in New Jersey now, I've spent a considerable amount of time in Atlanta as a result of that. And yeah, so Lisa, I see. Oh my goodness. Okay, I'm feeling better now. You joined the tech side of HR back in '96 with PeopleSoft. Yes. Go Dave. Uh, so we are definitely colleagues in that regard. So yeah, I'm excited about our discussion today and about the tips that you're going to be sharing, and also, of course, the participation from our attendees. I think we all learn from each other.
Awesome. Yes, yes, please. Thank you. Thank you for that. Please, everybody feel free to offer as many comments as you can as we go along. So here is our first question. How many HRIS system implementations have you been a part of? Let us know. I know a lot of people get involved in like the requirements process, like the functional teams get called in to provide requirements, and hopefully you're getting called in even before then. Um, Hopefully you're seeing those demos as well. Wow. 5 or more.
Wow.
Wow. Typically, is this what we're seeing? I think this is a lot, right? For 67% of the participants to have done 5 or more. That's good. That's good. I'm really curious to hear the feedback from those implementations. Great, thank you. Oh, people are still voting. Okay. Awesome. We can keep going from this. So thank you for that. So I guess it's not necessarily an introduction to system implementation, since you guys have kind of gone through this, but how does this process start essentially, right? Why do you want a successful system implementation? So the first thing for me is avoiding chaos. Um, if you are not successful, you haven't planned, you will have chaos. So you want to avoid that. You want employees to be satisfied. So employee satisfaction means that um, did your employees, did they come along with this whole process? Do you have employee adoption? Are they happy with what happened? Company perception and retention. When you're going through a system implementation, it's very stressful. It's a very stressful time. And how this goes will be it can impact the way you're perceived as the leadership team or the person who's in charge of this implementation, and your organization in general. You want your employees to be happy, you want them to find the value, and the retention piece comes in and Jason, you can talk more about this. The people who are involved in implementing a system, it's so taxing for them that you want to keep them at the end of it, right? Because it's a tough time, and we'll talk more about that. Your ROI, did you accomplish all of the goals that made you go through this whole process to begin with? Short-term and long-term goals. So that's why you want a successful implementation. And so we'll go through what that involves, and we're putting it into two sections, the readiness process and then the launch piece. Jason, I don't know if you want to add, let me know if you want to add anything to that.
I was just going to say on the retention piece. I mean,
Mhm.
particularly when you're implementing, I just call it a tier one product, which I would say the Oracle and the Workday side, where there's a lot of demand from large companies for that talent, is that if you don't give them a pay increase after the go live, that your in-house implementation team, you can expect some turnover, because as soon as they update their resume with with these new tier one tools and that they were part of the implementation team, the recruiters are absolutely going to start calling them, and their value goes up. So if you don't give them a bump, somebody else absolutely will. So if you want to retain them, it's something to keep in mind.
Especially Workday, right? That,
Workday and Oracle are
or yeah.
especially payroll people seem to be super, super high demand. The more complex the product, the higher demand the resources are when they have that experience.
Food for thought. All right. So what does readiness look like? How do you ensure your employees are prepared for the implementation process? So we'll go to the next slide. Um, So one of the things involved in readiness is the planning and the preparation phase. So last time, if you were able to join us, we talked a little bit about the first three items: defining clear objectives and goals for the new system. Why are you getting it? What are your short-term goals? It could be maybe you want to improve the processes currently, and then your long-term goals could be something like you're hiring, 1,000 employees in the next 2 to 3 years. So you want to scale. So define what those goals are, right? You want to allocate your resources. What are the functional teams? Lisa talked about involving the functional teams. Do you have enough people in your payroll team to be able to implement that piece of the solution? Do you have enough people in benefits? Are you going to need perhaps to hire people? So you want to be thinking about that, and of course, the budget. And then developing realistic timelines and key milestones. So not just the implementation timeline, but what's happening organizationally. Are there, some big key times that you want to have a plan A, B, and C for? For example, what if we don't go live? If we don't go live in September, will open enrollment still happen in November? I mean, you want to start thinking about those key milestones to ensure that everything is in line with the timeline, and also you have a plan B and C. So then the implementation process, conducting your initial system and process audit. What are the current processes today that are working or not working, and what needs to be improved, right? That's your initial system assessment. Establishing the success measures. And that could be something like, adoption. Hopefully it's 95%. I don't know what a good percentage of adoption is. I would be curious to hear from you guys, but obviously that should be like a part of your goal: adoption, your success measures. You don't want the payroll, and I'm sorry, it seems like I'm picking on the payroll team. It could be the finance team. You don't want them still utilizing spreadsheets. Are all the teams using the system, right? Because some teams, depending on how the implementation went, they may not be using the system, and that's not a good thing. You didn't meet your success measures. So think about this initially, and it helps later on when you're looking at ROI. And then alignment of vision, what that means is you want, the whole organizational, whatever the vision is organizationally, you want that also. You want it as part of this implementation, because you want all of the functional teams and the entire organization to really be in line in what is going on with the implementation.
Right. Now you got to think about not just open enrollment, but you've got your performance reviews, comp reviews, year-end closing books on finance side. I mean, you've got to look holistically in your planning, because something will come up and then you're going to lose a lot of people for a week or two. You have to look at the holidays as well.
Yes. ACA. I mean,
Yep.
Yeah. All right. So the other thing that you have to include in the readiness process is planning for an implementation consultant oversight. So this is an outside person who, I highly recommend. We all do, especially when you're going through such a large, whether it's an ERP, even if it's just one tool like a payroll system. Someone who will bring outside perspective, who will guide the conversations, who will make sure that all the voices get heard, right? Because people have so many opinions when this is happening. What matters, what doesn't, providing clarity. There's so much lingo that is happening, so much there's so much that is needed to be provided to the implementation consultants that clients just get lost in that and what's needed. Keeping the teams accountable. So who's doing what, ensuring that the project is moving smoothly, creating the momentum of the project. That's what this person does. So highly
And,
recommend you have.
just to chime in there, this is critical on the software side for the implementation services. So when you're looking at demos of a product, so you're looking, that's the software sales team, right? And they're showing you all the bells and whistles, the Ferrari model loaded down. And if you don't know that product, which you probably don't, if you're looking, at demos of it, you're trying to learn it, you can get in a lot of trouble by not even knowing which questions to ask. So it's critical, and I know companies typically will resist on this. And being on the implementation sales side, this is something I would do for free, just for hopes at a chance of winning the RFP work at the end. But the implementation partner is the one that's, say, you buy the software and that's the transaction. But the company that implements, I mean, you're like married, because they're going to be holding your hand all the way through. And if it's painful and you're not happy at the end, they're the ones that are going to get dinged, because you're going to sign a 2 or 3 year software, license subscription. And at that point, I mean, unless you're a Fortune 10 company, the software vendors pretty much like, okay, we did our part. And I say that it's like the phone company. If you pick up the phone and you get a dial tone, the phone company's like, not our problem. But that won't run a call center with just getting a dial tone. There's just a lot more to it. But I strongly recommend, I mean, there's several options to do it, but have somebody sitting in those demos with you that you trust, that can give you some advice and make sure that you're not buying the pig in the poke.
I couldn't have said it better. Thank you for saying that. So, yes, yes. Okay. Which aspect of change management do you find to be most challenging? And I know I'm using the word change management. You can let me know in the chat if you don't know what that means, and we can say it differently. So you can scan, okay, you guys already know. So you can scan this and let us know what you find most challenging when it comes to change management. Okay, let me vote. Hmm.
That
Okay.
managing
When
resistance, you got your saboteurs. Those are the worst.
Well, as we know, some people just don't like change, period. So
It's most
that's
people.
that's the stake in the ground they're going to put.
and most people don't like change, which is shocking, I guess, or it shouldn't be shocking. I don't know. It's not easy to change, but you're not going to move forward without change. All right, we can keep going. So, change management or change enablement. That's why I said change. So, I've grown up hearing change management, change management. Honestly, initially, I was getting lost in what that means until I stayed in this industry long to know what it means. But currently, I'm hearing Jason Everbook saying change enablement, which I love his new, the word. I don't know if it's his word, but essentially it just means you're enabling change. And what does that mean? You have to have a communication strategy. We're going through a huge change as you can see actually, I wanted to talk about this image. Love. Jason, you can talk about the image. But when I look at this image that we're seeing here, this is how I feel exactly when you're, in a roller coaster, exactly the words denial, shock, and that's what change management is. essentially when you're going through an implementation. Um, I like the shock factor in the beginning. Like, is this really happening? So it involves communication, having a communication strategy, creating strategies to manage resistance and emphasize the benefits. This is why we're doing this. And we'll talk more about that. Um, Analyze the impact of the new system on current processes, and then develop training programs for different user groups. So I don't know if you, yeah,
I love
go ahead.
change enablement. I think change enablement is where we're all at these days. We're living in such uncertain times, not just as it relates to systems implementation, but in life in general. So, building a culture of resiliency and arming your teams with the tools to enable change, because change is inevitable. Jason Everbrook is right. We are all guaranteed it pretty much every day. I don't know how you feel about that.
I, yes, I totally agree. To me, I feel like if I'm not changing, then I'm not learning. Um, and yeah, in our environment, there's so much happening. And I don't want to use the AI word, but that's one of the
Yes.
changes that is affecting everything from the way we work, to even the way we communicate with each other. And we have to learn it quickly to get ahead and stay ahead. So yeah, you can't live without change. All right, so we'll go to the next slide.
I'm particularly passionate about communications, as you can imagine, with my primary business imperative. Uh, but in terms of dealing with what are multiple stakeholders, multiple audiences, uh, uh, getting over the hurdle in terms of change management and change enablement, communications are always key. I think one of the things that I've seen in my career is when you're not building communications plans, comms planning into the overall systems implementation plan, and something gets sprung on people at the last minute. I recently heard some people in an industry talking about another type of system that was annoying them from a user standpoint because they really didn't understand why they had to use it. And that's a great example of a communication that should have gone out early in the process in terms of, this is why we've selected this system. These are the outcomes that we're driving. Here's the timeline. Here's what your role is or is not at this juncture, and making sure that you're being transparent in your communications and you're not springing something on people at the last moment and then being really mystified in terms of why they're not readily adopting it. Um, I think also engaging your audiences, engaging your internal customers is so important to your own input and your own learning, because by opening that line of communications, there's so much good feedback. Not
Mm.
always good feedback, but there's always so much feedback that you're going to get from your served customers, and that would be really, really helpful in terms of shaping outcomes. Um, Leah and Jason, I'd love to hear your thoughts on that as well.
I totally, Jason, you go. I'll let you
No,
go
I
first.
mean, I agree. It's communication is key, and especially during implementation. And it's one thing, even from the implementation kind of partner side. If there's an issue, you communicate it immediately, because it looks like we might miss this deadline, and it's like, well, let's let them know. Let's not see if we
Of
can maybe,
course.
well, we'll only be a day late. No, I mean, let's just let them know, hey, this concern came up, and make them aware. And hey, if we hit it, great. But at least they're aware and can prepare. And it's the same way with the implementation. I mean, you don't want to spring it on people, and you need that communication from above. This message has got to come from the top saying, "Yeah, this is what we're doing. This is why we're doing it." Then very, very important with the buy-in. So you don't have somebody tell their team, well, we're not going to use this system. We don't, we're going to stay on Excel.
Right.
That will
We're going to
cause
stay on
huge,
spreadsheets.
and it happens. I mean, it
Happens
happens. I
all the
mean,
all
time.
the time.
All the time.
Yeah. I agree with the just everything you all said about the communication. I would say what I've found is um, clients, right? If you're going through an implementation from a vendor perspective or whoever, it could be internal. All they want to know is they just want to know, don't be afraid to explain bad things. They just, transparency is all that everybody wants. There's a lot of fear around, oh, do we need to explain we're running late? Like what Jason is, we may not go live in, on the 1st. It may be the 15th, or I don't know, we're not able to do something. There's a lot of fear around escalations, but if you don't talk about it, then you're just going to derail things, right? So what I find is talk about everything. Most people can accept a bad um um I don't know, when something is not going well, as long as they're involved in the decision-making process. So that's what I would say. Over communicate is better than being afraid and not saying anything, and then the project is derailed for whatever reason. So we'll go to the next slide. And this is still about communications. Um, I would recommend having a reporting structure and governance. And what this looks like is you want to define what are the roles and the responsibilities, who is doing what in an implementation process, so that the whole team knows, who do they bring up issues to and what does that look like. You want the right people making the wrong person can derail a whole implementation. There's so many opinions that come from so many different areas, and you want a way to maybe even creating a matrix is one of the things that I've done before of if you get these opinions from these teams, is this a high impact kind of thing that's happening? Is it medium, low? Who is the final say when it comes to these things? Who is the decision maker? So creating a reporting structure and governance around this process. And it's mainly like your internal core team that is doing the work. Um, you can't deal without it. I've seen it where it can truly derail a project because one team wants something done a certain way, and there isn't a decision maker who's really making that decision. And another thing that I would say also is, and we may be talking about this later when we're talking about the teams, make sure you have the people who are not only the decision makers, but people who um, are involved in the day-to-day in these meetings. So yeah.
Yeah,
uh,
I think there's so much important information on this slide also because especially the what to share or what not to share, those closest to the project, of course, speak a certain language, a certain lingo is shared. If you were to try to take that lingo and then share it with a broader group, it might confuse them so much that you wind up in this continuous loop of having to over explain and overshare, and that then takes your energies away from what's most important. So I think Leah, I love where you start in the beginning when you're talking about defining roles and responsibilities. I also think, defining what gets shared and with whom and what the cadence is for sharing. Are we going to send something out monthly, quarterly, weekly? You have to be realistic in terms of what you can sustain in terms of communicating, but also, does it make sense to do it weekly? Maybe there isn't something significant happening weekly, or maybe you just want to, have your updates at the end of each month or whatever is appropriate. Jason, it looks like you wanted to jump in on that one as well.
I'll just also add that when you're planning up front, it can be a big democracy, and you can vote on how you want to do stuff. But when this implementation kicks off, you need to have a very clear decision process, because you can't have, you know, 6, 7 decision makers on a process when you get hung up on how are we going to do this workflow, or we want to do this workflow here, but this doesn't work for China. So are we going to do a separate one for China? Or are we going to modify a standard one? Once that implementation starts, somebody needs to be a decision maker. I mean, it can be 3 people that, meet, but somebody's got to have the final word. And this is where I'll typically try and pull a CHRO in and say, look, if there's a tie, I need a tiebreaker, because if this decision holds for a month, it's going to cost you a ton of money, because we're billing by the hour, and you're delaying a process, and we can't put the project on pause. Like, I have these consultants aligned to this project. So that governance structure for decision making needs to be clearly thought out once that project kicks off.
Man, I love what you said. I will just share. I remember being stuck on a Workday implementation project because the India team wanted something done completely differently from the rest of the organization, and we're truly like derailing the whole implementation. So just thinking about those things and planning ahead on how those decisions are going to be made will help tremendously. Okay, so engaging stakeholders. This is the planning for your teams. So you want to define the roles. Who are your functional teams? This is what I mentioned a little bit in the last slide, that yes, you do want the decision maker for payroll, but you also, when we're going through the requirements phase, especially, who does payroll? The person who actually processes payroll is who you want to include in these meetings, because the leader of that team, who's not the day-to-day person, can't really provide the requirements of the system. Hopefully that makes sense. So you want the person who knows exactly what they're doing today in the system and what the processes look like, to be the ones in the meetings providing the requirements. You want somebody to test, designate testers, key, huge. Testing is big during this process. Don't underestimate the testing team. The data team, that's another thing. We'll talk a little bit more about prepping for data, but think about your data team. This is the team that will be doing the data migration, pulling the data from all the multiple sources that you have today, preparing it, and then providing it to the vendor, and then your IT team, of course. You want to create your feedback mechanism process. And what this means is, if the team has feedback and things to say about the process, how is that going to be communicated? So that goes back to the communication. And then your change champions. So earlier we talked about, Jason, you used a better word. I used the complainer. Maybe it was Eugene. But that one person who complains, that could be your change champion. That could be the person who, if you can get them on your side, they will really help the rest of the population buy in what is happening. So think about the person who complains a lot, because if people see that they've been bought in, then I mean, you'll be good. Who else can be a change champion? The person who's been there the longest. It could be because they've seen what works for that organization, what doesn't work. They kind of know, they have the ins and outs. And also, some people who are just, for whatever reason, their peers respect them. So this is just an example of who I would recommend you pick as your change champions. These are the people who are going to help with training your teams, the rest of your teams and population, about the system, help with adoption, and send out a good word on why we're doing this and get employees excited. All right. So then this slide is the vendor implementation timelines. This is something that you want to review, make sure it aligns. And this is some of the stuff that we mentioned a little bit earlier. Open enrollment, your comp planning, all of the things that happen in an organization. Think about that to align your timeline. Does a timeline include, so vendors will give you their own timelines. So the person that's implementing whatever the system, I know you mentioned Workday, they'll come with their own timeline. Hopefully you have a consultant who can help you outside oversight, kind of review that to make sure it's all inclusive. Does it have the training that you need? Does it align, or has it included the timelines that you'll need for your other third-party service providers during this process? You have a lot of providers involved that you need to make sure that you include them in the process and in the timing, and then making sure that the timeline is the turnaround times are inclusive. And just an example here, not inclusive, but they make sense. So, for example, if you have to prepare your data, right? You have multiple data sources, and the vendor is telling you that they need the data within, I don't know, 3 days. Is that something that you can do? Or do you want to adjust that? So those are the things you need to start looking at with those timelines. Okay, and then preparing. So this is the data prep process. All of this is still in readiness. And Lisa, I see you have a note there. So the data prep part, new system means new process. What does that mean? If you're going to be getting a new system, and let's say you have data in Ceridian and you're getting Workday, for example, the way you pull data out of Ceridian is not necessarily how Workday needs it, right? Or how they want it. So what does that mean? You have to create different queries that you don't have today. You have to configure different things just to be able to pull the data in the way that it's needed in Workday. So you have to account for that timing. Your data team is going to need time for that, for the new processes, time to configure. And then think about your data archive strategy. And I know, Jason, you may have something to add there.
I mean, all these are, they're just, this is the planning, part of this journey. And the more planning you can do up front, the better it's going to be. Yeah, archiving is something we'd always run into, or how much history they want to bring over, and that can range from it's included to it's going to be several million more dollars to convert and bring over, live data. So these are discussions, and you talked about the data conversion. Who's responsible for it? Is the partner going to manage the data conversions, or are they planning to give you a template, and do they expect you to do it? I mean, these are those questions that if you don't know up front to even ask them, you can end up just in a lot of trouble, because when these decisions come up and they haven't been made, once that project kicks off, they become very, very expensive, and nobody's happy.
And things get drilled because some teams are like, what? You're not going to bring in all of our payroll data? Sorry, I'm picking on payroll again. I mean, yeah, you can't bring in like 7 years of payroll data. That's expensive. But if the team wasn't even involved in the beginning to plan for all of this, and they get surprised in the middle of an implementation, that's not good. So these are the things that
Well, that's something we'll talk to a customer, and on just saying on an RFP where they've selected the software, and now they're talking to a partner, and they want to kick off in 4 weeks. And they're like, wait a minute, what have you guys been doing, for the last 6 months? Oh, we're reviewing software. Like, that's it. And it's like, this is not good. And that's, I mean, so many companies that's just what they think is that, well, and we're gonna open up a can and throw it on the wall, and that's it, and it's done. You got to start planning. I mean, I'd say 6 months in advance, and even before the software selection, because a lot of these things are going to be the same. You're going to have to do regardless of which software you select, but you've got to be running these kind of decisions in tandem, and that's where some of these independent consultants who can come in and help you set
Yeah,
up and strategize. It's key to success.
agreed. Okay, we have 15 minutes left, so we'll try to go quickly. So, questions so far? Yes, usually most implementations require data cleanup. Yes, Lisa, very true. Um, any questions so far? Okay, we'll keep going. I don't see questions in the chat. So you've been asked to be on the HCM implementation team as a SME for your department. What word comes to mind? So if you take you can scan this and let us know what word comes to mind. I know we have payroll people here, Tiana. What word comes to mind?
How do you spell Xanax?
Wow. Someone is very positive in this call, in this meeting. Frightening. Yes.
I love this. I love that you're asking for one word. This is
I
refreshing.
know even
Too much
if you-
work. Yeah. Yes, work is work.
I love the prioritize there. Wow.
Mhm.
Because that is key, right?
Yeah,
All right.
Jason brought up such a good point about organizations that feel that because they've sat through many hours of demos from software providers that was the process and it's anything but. There's so much work that has to go on internally
Yeah.
before you could even determine who the best fit software provider would be.
Yeah. Timing. Hallelujah. Wow.
Aw,
Awesome. All right, let's keep going.
job security.
Job security. Yes. Oh my
Yes,
gosh.
yes, yes.
Yes. Yes. Okay. Deployment. Executing the plan system launch and ensuring a smooth transition. Okay, so what's involved in this process? So we just talked about readiness, and now we're going to quickly talk to you about deployment. So training and support strategies, deciding who's taking which training. So training is huge, as you all know, during this process. You have these different teams. You have the implementation team, you have the functional teams, payroll, benefits, onboarding, those teams, and then you have the end user. So these are the people, they could be like your managers, your location managers, or your day-to-day end user, like your HR team, even the functional teams, and then employees. So how will all these people be trained? Determining the best way to train your population. It could be classroom training, cross training, train the trainer, and then developing the workflow to train and have them access that training. So it could be quick reference guides, on demand, or pre-recorded videos. Um, yeah, so that's your training. This piece is huge, training and support. And then your data. So we talked a little bit about data, but once you figure out the data planning, then what does that migration process look like? Are you going to be integrating systems? How will you test that data to ensure that it's accurate? The key is to test the data, because if the data is not right, then nothing's going, you might as well forget everything that we're doing. Um, and then you know, your data backup strategies, of course, always have a backup for the data. Okay,
Te-
so test.
Testing. Yes, this is I can't tell you, how many customers will say, so what kind of automated, testing tools, were you guys going to use for the testing? And I'm just like, No, no. You
Is that how you
have
tell
to,
them?
yes, yes. You know me, like, I'm
That was
candid.
no, no,
Yeah,
yes, yes.
can't hide it on my face. If 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 you aren't going to, you have to get into the system and test it and find things that aren't working right. Then you can be confident when you go live that things are going to go as well as possible. I mean, it might be some issue you missed, but avoid the, we're going to do that, run tons of automated testing. Get in the system. Your people need to be in the system. Your end users need to be in the system. Um, pick that team, give them the scripts, make sure the scripts align with what you're doing. Just this is where projects absolutely will collapse. And if you go live and people aren't getting paid, somebody posted job security in the chat. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's where job security becomes a real issue because they're going to be blaming HR. I mean, they're not going to be blaming the implementation partner. The employee population is going to be calling you, going, "Where's my check?" In this stupid system that you guys selected. Um, test before you go live.
Agree. Couldn't agree more. So post-implementation assessment. So once you go live, um, you're not done. Once you go live, payroll is working, people are getting their benefits, you could use the system, then what do? You have to kind of measure what you just did to make sure that this really is working. You're not done once you go live. You have to ensure, okay, did payroll team is using the system? Yes. All the teams are using the system, user adoption. Your success metrics that we talked about earlier, did we meet our goals? Um, you have to measure that. What lessons were learned during this process and what could have gone better? Talk about that to improve, because once you go live with the system, you're going to do this again. I don't want to scare anybody, but you, just going live doesn't mean that this stops. You have to keep optimizing it. Things are changing. Technology changes a lot. So learn from this piece to implement it in the next process and create your strategies for continuous improvement.
Yep.
Yeah,
Plan phase 2.
plan phase 2. I love that. We used to have like system strategies where we would have like 5-year long, was it like 5-year long strategies, but now it's like 2 years. Even 2 years is too long, honestly.
I mean, the old PeopleSoft days, 5 years, that was phase 1.
That's a
There's
PeopleSoft
customers,
joke.
there's customers that still aren't fully live on PeopleSoft.
Wow.
And I started in PeopleSoft. I think several of us are in that same boat in the 90s. But no, the good stuff. It's
Yes.
it's testing, planning. These are where projects fail. I mean, that's all. That's what I can tell you. When a project failed, you can go back and say it was planning and testing. Those are that will cause catastrophic problems
Yeah.
on an implementation.
To me, I would say I agree. I agree. Planning and testing. For whatever reason, no one wants to test, right? It's a lot of work, but that's why you plan for it. That's why we're planning for the team now before we start the process. I would say to me, testing, gosh, even when I was going through a Workday implementation and I saw that testing plan, man, I mean, people get anxiety from what needs to be done, but what helped was having a team and ensuring that all the functional teams are also involved in the testing. One person can't test. Another thing I did recently on an implementation that I saw going very well during testing was all of us testing together. So all of us being on a call, because now people are doing things online, virtually, instead of being in the rooms, the war rooms that we used to be in. But all of us working together, being able to ask questions really quickly, really helped with the testing and fixing things on the go. I thought that went really well. But testing is key. Don't let that scare you. That's why you plan for the team early, and then having those implementation calls planned out. Somebody talked about planning when we asked that question, and the timing. Having those meetings on your calendar ahead of time so that you know that they're there and you can work around that also works. Helps a lot with the planning. All
Agree.
right. What questions do you guys have? And thank you for being so engaging. I like seeing all of the comments.
And Lisa cracked me up, yeah, with a crowd strike. Absolutely. God.
Yeah, that's a painful reminder, especially for Delta Airlines. Well, I see one of your upcoming lunch and learns is going to focus on AI. And I can
Yes.
tell you just from my little perspective on what's going on at the HR Tech Conference, this is a huge topic for attendees. We always ask attendees, what they're going to the show for, and AI is tops on everyone's list. So they're
Still,
trying to figure out how it's going to work for them and what it means to them. So important
I'm
topic.
and I'm so glad to see that HR teams too are the ones really asking and interested, right?
Yes.
Um, I mean, we're not used to seeing HR leaders being in the center of what's changing, but things have taken a shift in the last couple of years, I would say, and it's really good to see. So you all as HR leaders, you're the center. I mean, we're going to be talking about you at HR Tech. And if you're not coming, please look up Jeanne. Jeanne Achille heads the Women in HR Tech Summit. I will be there and I cannot wait. Let me make sure I put in your LinkedIn for everybody to follow you and Jason as well. Um, Second, pulling it up.
Jason, I love that you have your phone number there. You are bold because no doubt you are going to get calls after after today's session. You have called out some really important points and obviously have considerable experience.
I'm happy to help.
Yes, please. I mean, Jason is definitely, especially Athena. I know you mentioned Workday. He is the Workday guru. Um, so that's Jean's. There's Jean's LinkedIn for everybody. Please follow her. She is a wealth of information. And here's Jason's LinkedIn. Thank you, Athena. Thank you guys for joining us.
Thanks for the
Join
invite. It's a lot
us.
of fun.
Yeah,
Yes,
join
thank
us
you.
next
This is a
month.
pleasure.
Good luck, y'all.
Thank you. Thank you both. This was great. Thank you so much. Thank you, Sue. Thanks, guys. Bye.